Okay, let's talk about for loops and the scope of the data we're passing through it. So it looks like this website has or loads pages in a method which does not refresh the page. So let's take a look at the network here. When we hit this next page button, what happens is an API call goes out through this post method with the parameter of page number. And then just switches out the HTML content here. But the page isn't reloading, which means we could loop through this entire set of data by just clicking this button. So how would we go about doing that? Let's check here, inspect the element. We have page link next. Oops, copy that. And there's only one element, which means that that's the only one we have to worry about, I imagine. Yeah, the other is previous. And then each one has a number. You might want to play with that later, but right now, all we really need to do is say document, get element by class name, throw in that class name. We know it's always going to be the one and only, so we can call this specifically and then say click, right? And now that'll click the button and our page reload, but the content of the page reloads. Now, what if we wanted to do this indefinitely? Seems simple, right? We'll just say for. We can throw in some arbitrary variable here. We'll say I 0, and we'll iterate through it. We'll say while I is less than, I don't know, let's not go too crazy. We'll say 10. No, let's say 5. While I is less than 5, I plus plus, so we're iterating through here. There's a different way to do this, but for consistency purposes, I think it's best just to stick with the same type of for loop when you're learning. Now, we want what the action we want to perform, right, is that we click this button. So let's try it out and see what happens. Oopsie. Keep forgetting that my and function doesn't, or key doesn't work. Paste this in here. See what happens. Okay. Well, it clicked the link, but it did it all at once. It clicked the link 5 times all at once, which means those pages did load, but they loaded so quickly that I'm not confident we could extract information out of there. We might be able to. I actually built something briefly a few weeks ago that I didn't create any kind of hold time for it to load, and it actually worked. But that's not something that you can count on consistently, especially if you're looping through. I mean, how many hundreds of pages could we have here? I don't know. But eventually, if we're storing data in the browser, it's going to start to lag. We cannot reliably count on um, the page loading in a timely manner as we're paging through it. So how would we tell it to wait? Well, it seems obvious, right? That we just say set timeout. It's an oldie but a goodie. And really, this probably isn't the best way to go about this either, but for these purposes, we'll try it out. We're going to tell it to wait 1.3 seconds. Now let's see what happens. Well, that didn't seem to do what we were wanting it to do, right? It just clicked it once. Seems like it waited for a second. There was something going on. The reason for this, I think, is that our scope of this for loop is all executing at once. So what happens is the for loop will essentially do this, but if the information is the same in it, it'll only happen once. So if we were to say, um, or I'm not, yeah, there's actually an exercise in my ability to explain this because for loops are really, or were very frustrating for me early on. And I guess I still don't understand them as well as I could. So let's try something else. We'll say I plus, no, we'll say I times a third of a second. Let's see what happens there. Okay, clicked it 5 times. Cool, that worked, right? And it seemed to actually wait the amount of time we needed it to wait. Um, Very cool. How would we do this if we wanted to execute it as a function? Well, we could take this out of the for loop, create a function that says e, I guess. We'll paste this back in here. Now we'll give this a parameter of n, which is the number that we'll pass through from the for loop. Now, we always start with 0 when we're counting in our loops here. So ideally, we wouldn't want to wait more than 0 seconds on the first iteration. So to do that, we could just say something like n plus 1, that in parentheses to scope that. Eighth grade math stuff here. Should, should get it. Now it's going to say n plus 1. So the starting time, it'll be 0 plus 1 equals 1 times 333. Let's see what happens here. Well, let's throw this function up in the for loop, or nothing will happen. And we'll pass I through as the argument. We'll click it. So click once, twice, times, 4 times. Looks like it clicked through. No issues. There we go. We could do this at scale by, well, let's try increasing it. Let's have it do it 10 times and see what happens, or 15 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I think we're moving a little bit too fast still. So let's give it 1.3 seconds. There we go. That's a little better. It gives it time to load. And as this is happening, right, we can create other functions that will extract this information, throw it into a JSON object for us, and then when it's complete, I can just download it. I imagine there are a lot of pages here. I wonder if there's any way for us to figure it out. I'm not trying to build this scraper right now. I just wanted to kind of go through the basic functions of getting started and looping through a page like this. Websites that have this kind of setup are really handy for large scale client-side web scraping. It's essentially what a Chrome extension would do without having to build a Chrome extension. Because the page doesn't refresh, we don't have to insert new JavaScript every time. Anyway, that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I think Brett is actually building a scraper in WebIO to do this. So it'd be interesting to see what he comes up with and how his approach goes. Later, I've got to get some lunch.